Story 1. The night I couldn't leave. I still hate storm warnings. Not storms themselves, not really. It's the part before, when everybody starts acting like they're being sensible. Boarding windows, packing bags, texting instructions, making it sound temporary. That's what gets me. Because the worst part of that night wasn't when somebody started knocking. It was all the normal things people said before it happened. Be careful. Feed the cats at 9. If the power goes out, reset the breaker. It was all so ordinary that by the time I understood what the messages were actually doing, I was already exactly where they wanted me. My name's Nella Voss. I was 23 when this happened, and at the time I was living over my aunt's detached garage in Broken Arrow, trying to save money and pretending I didn't mind how quiet it got at night. I don't like being alone. I never really have. I'm one of those people who leaves the television on in the next room just to hear voices, so I don't know why I agreed to house sit during a storm warning except that Corin was my friend. And Corin always asked for favors in a way that made saying no feel rude. He and his wife were leaving Tulsa for the night because of a bad line of weather moving in from the west. Their house was on South New Haven Avenue, in one of those suburban blocks where every front porch has the same potted plants and every driveway slopes the same way. He told me it would just be one night. Feed the cats, check the sump pump if the basement alarm went off, maybe reset the kitchen breaker if the microwave and toaster tripped it again. Normal stuff, helpful stuff, nothing dramatic. I got there a little after 8 in the evening. The sky had that green-gray color it gets before something ugly. The air smelled like wet leaves, damp carpet, and that sharp electrical tang storm air has, like hot metal and rainwater. Wind kept worrying the loose front windows and making the frames click in their tracks. When I opened the front door, it felt heavier than it should have, like I was pulling against somebody on the other side. I remember noticing that and then immediately deciding it was because of the pressure outside. Inside, everything looked fine. The kitchen light over the sink had that warm yellow color that makes any room feel safer than it is. The cats were irritated but normal. One of them rubbed against my leg and left orange fur on my black jean. Corin had written instructions on a notepad by the fridge even though he'd already texted them to me twice. That's just how he was, organized to the point of annoyance. It actually reassured me. The first weird text came while I was putting my bag in the guest room. Lock the laundry door. That was all it said. I looked at the laundry room at the end of the hall. The door was already shut. I walked over, checked the deadbolt, and felt a little stupid doing it because I knew I'd already locked it when I came in. I texted back, already did. A few seconds later he replied, good. Keep it that way. I just stood there smelling detergent, stale cat litter, and that faint damp smell houses get when weather rolls in. I told myself he was stressed. Evacuation makes people repeat themselves. I didn't want to sound jumpy, so I set my phone down on the bed and went back to unpacking. But when I walked away, I noticed the laundry room light was on. I was pretty sure I hadn't turned it on. By 9, the wind had gotten louder. Not steady loud, not background loud. It came in hard bursts that made the siding complain and sent branches scratching across the outer wall. I settled on the couch with a blanket and one of Corin's old throw pillows and tried to make the night feel normal. I was halfway through a stupid baking show with the volume too high when another text came through. Stay out of the front room from 9:30 to 10. Sit in the kitchen. I stared at that longer than I should have. Corin loved specific. He was the kind of person who'd text you where to stand in a parking lot while he picked you up. So I came up with a reason for it almost immediately. The big front windows probably leaked in bad storms. Maybe one of the trees out front had a weak branch over the roofline. Maybe he'd forgotten to mention it earlier and was trying to sound casual now. That all made sense. Enough sense that I didn't want to be dramatic about it. So at 9:30 I moved to the kitchen. The room smelled like dish soap, coffee grounds, and the wet wood smell coming off the deck outside. The hanging light over the table swung just enough for me to notice it. The cats stayed low, both of them moving with that tense little crouch animals get before weather turn. I had just sat down when something slammed into the front of the house. Not hail, not a branch brushing the siding, a heavy, focused hit, hard enough to make the silverware in the drawer rattle. I pushed back from the table so fast the chair legs scraped the tile. My first thought was debris. A trash bin, patio furniture, something thrown by the wind. That had to be it. But while I was still standing there, my phone buzzed again. "You're fine. Stay where you are until 10. That was the first moment I felt the night narrow around me, like the walls of the house had shifted inward a little. I texted, "What was that?" and got no answer. At 10:05 he sent, "Go upstairs. Take both cats if you can." I almost called him then. I should have. Instead, I went upstairs because that still felt easier than accusing my friend of being weird on purpose. The stairs creaked along the edges. Upstairs smelled like old dust, clean sheets, and the faint mineral smell from the bathroom sink. I tried to grab the orange cat and got clawed for my trouble. He disappeared into the hall closet. The other one ran under the bed in the main bedroom. I remember kneeling there, reaching into darkness for a cat that wouldn't come out, while wind shoved at the house and the floor under me gave tiny settling pops. I was annoyed more than scared. That's the embarrassing part. I kept filtering everything through how I'd look if I overreacted. I kept thinking, if this is nothing and I call somebody, Corin is going to tell this story for years. Then, from downstairs, I heard footsteps, not loud, just measured, hardwood steps crossing the front room, then stopping, then crossing again. I froze with one arm still under the bed. I listened for Corin's voice, for the front door, for anything that would make sense. Nothing, just the wind in the windows and my own breathing getting noisier. I texted, "Are you back?" He answered immediately, "Do not go downstairs yet." I felt something in my chest go tight and high, like I'd run too fast in cold air. I called him. The call rang once and dropped. I called again, same thing, no voicemail, no nothing. Then another text, "Guest bath. Shut the door. Lights off." I actually stood there for a second trying to decide whether obeying a weird instruction was somehow more embarrassing than hiding in a bathroom. Then lightning flashed through the bedroom curtains and I moved. The upstairs guest bathroom was tiny, powder blue walls, one frosted window over the tub, two folded hand towels with little embroidered leaves on them. When I switched off the light and closed the door, it went dark in that thick way where you can't tell if your eyes are open or closed. The room smelled like stale toothpaste and damp fabric. I could hear the wind through the exhaust vent. Then I heard the front door open. Not all the way, just the latch. Then that long, slow groan of a heavy door moving inward against pressure. A colder smell came into the house right after. Rain and mud and wet concrete. Then a dragging sound across the entry tile. My mouth went dry immediately. I texted, "I'm calling someone." He wrote back, "If you do, don't leave the bathroom until they are inside with you." That wording sat wrong in my head. Not until help arrives, not wait there, until they are inside with you. Like the hallway itself had become dangerous. I called non-emergency because even then I was still trying not to sound stupid. I wish that weren't true, but it is. The line connected. There was a burst of static so loud I had to yank the phone from my ear, and then nothing. Open silence. No operator, no disconnect tone, just dead air with a faint hiss under it. The bathroom doorknob turned, slowly, carefully, down and then back up. My hands started shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone in the tub. I backed up until the edge of the tub hit the backs of my legs. I could feel my pulse in my throat, and in the soft skin of my wrists. I waited for the knob to move again. Instead, my phone lit up. Good. Don't answer any door if it knocks. Midnight is the hard part. That was when the countdown started for real. Everything after that got measured against midnight. 10:40, 11:10, 11:38. I kept checking the time because the message had made it feel like the night had shape now, like something was building toward a specific hour and I was trapped inside it with no way to speed it up. Every instruction after that came with something attached to it. At 11, he told me to stay out of the upstairs bedroom. While I stood in the hallway, something scraped slowly across the outside wall beneath the bedroom window, like a patio block being dragged over brick. At 11:15, he told me to go to the kitchen but not go near the sink. I had barely stepped into the room when the little window over the sink cracked with a sharp, dry pop and a burst of rain blew through the gap. At 11:30, I got hall closet, keep the door cracked. So I crouched in the linen closet with towels brushing my shoulder and the smell of laundry soap in my nose, while something thudded softly against the front porch, once every few seconds, like somebody testing the boards with the heel of a boot. That's the part people ask me about. Why didn't I leave? Why didn't I run to the car? The truth is, by then the instructions had lined up with the noises too many times. It felt less like taking orders and more like surviving a pattern I didn't understand. Also, and this matters, every decision felt social even though I was alone. If I ran out and nothing happened, I was the crazy friend who couldn't handle a storm. If I stayed and I was wrong, then I was just being sensible. That's how I kept thinking. Like there would still be a version of this I had to explain later. A little after midnight, the messages changed tone. Don't stay by windows. If you hear your name, don't answer. Keep both cats with you if they come to you. That last one lodged in my head because both cats had vanished almost an hour earlier. Then came one I didn't follow. Go to the downstairs half bath. Now, I was in the upstairs hall and I couldn't make myself cross the landing and go down into the dark. I just couldn't. I stood there, sweating through my shirt even though the air had gone cool, staring at the black stairwell. 30 seconds later, something hit the outside wall beside me so hard the framed photo in the hall tipped sideways. After that, I obeyed. The downstairs half-bath smelled like bleach tablets and one of those cinnamon candles that never really lose their scent. I sat on the floor with my knees to my chest, phone in one hand, a fireplace poker in the other that I didn't remember grabbing. My throat was so tight it hurt to swallow. Every few minutes the house produced another sound. Light knocks on the back door. A harder knock under the kitchen window. Slow steps on the porch. Once, very clearly, the sound of somebody trying the knob on the laundry room door. I texted who is outside. He didn't answer for a full minute. Then 3 messages came in. Don't make noise. They're checking which room you're in. Make it to 3. 3. A new deadline. A worse one. By 1 in the morning, the storm had moved into that heavy rain stage where the whole world sounds blurred. Water hammered the gutters. Something dripped steadily in the kitchen. The house felt swollen with damp air. I tried calling my aunt. The call failed before it rang. I tried emergency services. Same thing. Once I thought I heard a dispatcher for half a second, then only static, then silence again. Around 2, something started walking around the outside of the house in slow loops. Front porch, sidewall, backyard deck. Sidewall again, not rushing, not hiding, just circling. The texts kept coming. Not yet. Stay low. Don't look out. My hands had gone numb from gripping the poker. Every time lightning flashed through the little frosted bath window, I could see the outline of my own knees and nothing else. I kept realizing I was holding my breath and forcing myself to let it out slowly so I wouldn't make noise. Then, a little before 3, the power went out. The light above the sink blinked twice and died. The fact gave one last weak rattle and stopped. Without it, the house turned huge. I could hear water in the walls, wind under the eaves, the rain ticking in separate little bursts on different surfaces. My phone battery was under 20%. At exactly 3 in the morning, a message arrived. Do not open any door, no matter what it says. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then somebody knocked on the front door. 3 calm taps. I left the half bath before I understood I was doing it. I think some part of me still believed if it was Corin, if he was back, then all of it would collapse into something stupid and explainable. I stood in the dark hall where I could see the shape of the front door and the pale outline of the narrow glass beside it. Knock, knock, knock. Then Corin's voice. Nell, open up. Not similar, not close, exact. My teeth clenched so hard my jaw hurt. I didn't answer. A few seconds later, the voice said, You can leave Moose in the linen closet. He likes the towels. I actually lost my balance for a second when I heard that. Corin had said those exact words months before when I helped them move in. Nobody else should have known that. Not like that. Not in that tone. Same lazy way he flattened my name, same little breath between phrases. Another knock, firmer this time. Nell, I know you're in the hall. My legs felt watery and borrowed. I looked at my phone. No new message. Whoever had been texting me all night had gone completely silent. Outside, in Corin's voice, something laughed once. Not a happy laugh, more like a little acknowledgement. Then it said, If you make me come around back, it'll take longer. That's the moment I understood the instructions weren't about helping me move safely through the house. They were about keeping me inside it until a certain hour, keeping me from making whatever wrong choice would have ended this sooner. I still don't know if the person texting me was protecting me, controlling me, or just trying to see how long I'd listen. I backed away from the door and slid down against the hallway wall. Both cats found me then, which somehow made it worse. The gray one pressed so hard against my side I could feel her ribs moving. Moose crouched in my lap with his claws half out. Outside, the knocking shifted to the front window, then the side of the house, then under the kitchen window. Once I heard my name from the backyard, once from the laundry room side of the house, too close. I didn't move again. I stayed on that floor until morning, every muscle locked, ignoring the knocks, the footsteps, the messages that eventually started again around 3:30. Stay low, almost done, don't answer anything. I watched my battery sink and the darkness thin and the windows turn from black to deep blue to gray. Normal sounds returned slowly. Tires on wet pavement, a distant garbage truck, somebody's dog barking, bird song. Thin and uncertain at first. Only when full daylight was in the front hall did I unlock the door. Outside, the porch was wet and empty. The flower bed under the front window was churned into deep, soft dents like somebody had stood there for a very long time, shifting from foot to foot. The back gate hung open. The cracked kitchen window had mud on the outside frame at shoulder height, smeared in a flat shape that could have been a hand if I wanted it to be. I didn't check more than that. I got the cats into the bedroom, grabbed my bag, and sat in my car with the doors locked until my breathing stopped stuttering. Corin called me just after 7. His voice, the real one, sounded sleep-thick and confused. He said they'd lost signal outside Sepulpa the night before and only got it back after sunrise. He said he hadn't sent anything after a little before 10. He said maybe messages got delayed, maybe the storm bounced things around. He kept talking like there was a version of the world where that explanation held up. I didn't argue, I just drove home. I wish that was the end of it. I really do. But the next night, after I'd already left the house, after the sun was down and I was back over my aunt's garage with every light on, my phone buzzed. Move upstairs. A minute later, another one. Stay out of the front room. Then, just after midnight, one more. Do not open any door, no matter what it says. I changed my number after that, but for weeks I still kept my shoes beside the bed and slept with my phone in my hand. I still don't know whether the thing outside that house kept circling because it knew I was there, or because it knew I was listening. What I know is this. Sometimes when a storm warning comes through and my windows start ticking in their frames, I catch myself looking toward the hallway like I'm waiting for a message to tell me where to stand. I told myself for a long time that surviving that night meant it was over. That's what people mean when they ask if you're okay. They want the version where morning happened and everybody went back to being ordinary. But ordinary didn't come back clean after that. Corin and I don't talk now, not because of a fight. We just sort of slid out of each other's lives after he kept insisting he'd had no signal, and I kept hearing his voice in places it shouldn't have been. The worst part is that I still don't know if the texts were the danger or the reason I made it to daylight. I only know they continued after I was gone, still acting like I was in that house, still measuring out the night in commands. When my phone vibrates after dark, I look at it from across the room first. And when storms roll over Tulsa, I don't stay anywhere with more than one door. Story 2. The code he never forgot. The first time I knew for sure I wasn't alone in my apartment, there wasn't anybody there to see it with me. That's the part that still gets under my skin. If somebody else had been standing beside me, maybe I could tell this story like it belongs to the past. But I was by myself, staring at a bathroom mirror that should have been dry, watching a handprint bloom through the fog from the wrong side of the glass. The front door was still locked, the alarms were armed, and the only other person in the world who knew my access code was someone I used to trust enough to leave spare keys with. My name's Leora Kemp. I was 30 when this happened, and I lived alone in a secured apartment building in Denver, in one of those modern complexes that smell faintly like fresh paint and industrial, cleaner no matter how long people have lived there. It was near Capitol Hill, all polished concrete parcel lockers and a lobby camera aimed at the mailboxes. I liked living alone, genuinely liked it. I worked, came home, cooked the same 3 dinners, watered the same 2 plants, and watched bad crime shows until I got sleepy. My apartment felt controlled, predictable. Mine. A long time before all this, I gave my access code to a friend named Gavin because he used to bring in packages when I traveled. We hadn't spoken in months by then. Not for any dramatic reason, just one of those long adult drifts where texts get slower and then stop. I never changed the code because I didn't think I needed to. That was my first mistake, and probably the smallest one. The first wrong note was a kitchen drawer. I came home from work one evening, put my bag on the counter, and noticed the utensil drawer was open maybe 2 inches. Not enough to look tossed, just open. I remember smiling at myself because I thought, there you go again, leaving things halfway and then blaming the universe. I closed it, washed my hands, and moved on. That should have been nothing. The next night, the framed photo on the bookshelf had shifted. It wasn't turned over or moved far, just angled slightly inward like somebody had picked it up and set it back down without noticing the exact position. I stood there with my keys still in my hand, looking at a picture of me and my sister at Red Rocks, trying to decide whether the cleaning service from the week before could somehow still explain it. That made no sense, but I reached for it anyway. I always reached for the nicest explanation first. By the 3rd night, the pattern was too deliberate to ignore. A lamp in the bedroom was on when I got home, even though I hadn't gone in there that morning. My bathroom hand towel was folded differently. Not better, just differently. The olive oil bottle by the stove had been moved a few inches to the left, lined up too neatly with the salt. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. It felt personal in a way I didn't want to name. like somebody had touched the surface of my life just enough to prove they could. Still, I kept giving it kind explanations. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe I'd started doing things on autopilot and forgetting them. Maybe the building manager had come in for maintenance and forgotten to log it. I actually preferred the possibility that my own memory was slipping over the possibility that someone had been walking around my apartment and choosing what to move. The security system made that easier to believe. There was an app with entry logs and alarms, and every time I checked it, the record showed only me. My code, my time, nothing else. No forced entry alerts, no sensor trips, no maintenance override. Clean and ordinary. Then the pace changed. I came home one Thursday and the overhead light in my hallway was on. I never used that light because it was too bright and made the apartment feel like a dentist's office. I stood just inside the door with the schvack humming steadily through the vents, smelling lemon cleaner and the takeout container in my hand, and had this very clear thought that somebody was in there waiting for me to decide what to do next. I said hello softly, which still embarrasses me. No answer. I checked every room with my phone ready in one sweaty hand. Bedroom, empty. Closet, empty. Shower curtain open. Under the bed, nothing but a storage bin and dust. The apartment looked exactly like it always did, except that everything felt lightly handled. A throw blanket smoothed flatter than I leave it, a cereal box turned label forward, my desk chair nudged in. That night I barely slept. Every tiny sound in the building came through sharper than usual. Pipes ticking, elevator cables humming somewhere down the hall. A laugh outside on the sidewalk below. I kept thinking I heard movement from my kitchen and then realizing it was only the refrigerator settling. My chest stayed tight the whole night, like I had a fist just under my sternum. The next day I checked the entry logs again at work. Same thing. No entries except mine. I should have called building security right then. Instead, I left work early because I wanted to prove to myself there was a simple answer. That's the optimistic part of me, the part I don't trust anymore. I thought if I came home unexpectedly and found everything normal, I'd feel foolish and relieved and maybe finally change the code just to calm myself down. I took the stairs instead of the elevator so nobody would see me waiting or think I was being dramatic. The hallway outside my unit smelled like carpet shampoo and somebody's curry from down the corridor. My door looked normal, locked, alarm armed, the little green light on the keypad steady. I disarmed it and stepped inside. The apartment was quiet, too quiet in a way that made the fac hum sound louder, almost human. The overhead light in the hallway was off this time. My keys were cold in my hand. I don't know why I went to the bathroom first. Maybe because it was the one room with no exterior windows. Maybe because I could hear something faint in there. Not water, more like the tiny tap of cooling metal. The mirror was fogged, not fully. Not shower steam fogged, just a pale sheet of moisture across the center as if somebody had stood very close to it breathing. I stopped in the doorway. The bathroom was cool. The tiles under my shoes felt cold through the soles. There was no sound of dripping water. The shower was dry. The sink was dry. The mirror should have been clear. Then, right in front of me, a handprint appeared from the inside, not slapped on. Pressed slowly outward, 5 points blooming one after another in the condensation as if a hand were flattening against the back of the glass. I couldn't move for a second. My body just refused. My throat closed so tight I made this little useless sound instead of a scream. Then every part of me started working at once. I backed up hard enough to hit the hall wall with my shoulder. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled my phone twice trying to unlock it. The front door was still dead bolted. I could see it from where I stood. I ran anyway. I left my bag, my laptop, my shoes by the couch, everything. I grabbed only my keys because they were already in my hand. I yanked the door open, set off the alarm by forgetting to arm anything, and sprinted down the hall in my socks. The carpet burned under my feet. I hit the stairwell door with my palm and nearly fell down the first flight because my legs were moving faster than I could control. Outside, the air felt thin and chemically cold. I made it to my car and locked the doors even though I was in an open lot in broad afternoon light. My pulse was kicking so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. It took me 3 tries to call building management because my hands wouldn't stop slipping on the screen. Security went up with me, 2 of them, serious looking, calm, already bored. I hated them before we opened the door because I knew how this was going to sound. We went through the apartment together. Nothing. No one inside. No open windows. No signs of forced entry. The mirror had cleared by then, leaving only the faint shape of a hand smeared in the center. One of the guards asked if I'd maybe taken a hot shower earlier and forgotten. He said it gently, which somehow made it worse. The lock record still showed nothing but my code. I did not sleep there that night, or any night after. I booked a hotel, then called my sister, then called the leasing office and paid whatever I had to pay to break the lease. I told people it was stress, a building issue. I didn't tell Gavin anything. I didn't ask him whether he'd been there. I didn't want to hear whatever answer he had prepared, and I didn't want to watch his face while he gave it. I kept thinking about small things I'd ignored: the blanket folded flatter, the lamp on, the hand towel, the cereal box lined up. Whoever had been in there hadn't come for valuables. They'd come to touch my routine, my counters, my bathroom sink, the lip balm on my nightstand, the inside of my mirror cabinet, things I only ever handled alone. That's what made it feel filthy long after I left. A few weeks later, I got the final paperwork from the building. Tucked into the security report was a system note I almost missed. One timestamp for unit entry had been flagged as anomalous because the door registered open without a corresponding unlock event. Not forced, not keyed, not coded, just open. I read that line maybe 20 times. I still don't know what it means. Maybe it was a software error. Maybe the hardware glitched. Maybe the building was lying to protect itself. But I know what I saw in that mirror, and I know how the apartment looked after somebody had spent time inside my life without taking anything at all. I use a different lock now, then another behind that, and I still keep certain drawers exactly the way I leave them. Because once you've learned how invasive a half-open drawer can feel, you never stop noticing. I left that apartment in daylight with 2 trash bags, 1 suitcase, and a cardboard box full of the most important things I could grab in under 10 minutes. It should have felt dramatic, but honestly it felt quiet, like admitting something to myself I should have admitted sooner. People always imagine escape as this loud, decisive act. Mine was mostly me avoiding looking at my own bathroom while movers carried out a bookshelf. I never confronted Gavin. Maybe that sounds weak. Maybe it is. But I kept thinking that if he said no too quickly or smiled at the wrong time, I'd know. And if he said yes, then I'd have to live with what that meant about how long he had access to me without my noticing. The question that stayed wasn't whether someone got in. It was why the system showed 1 entry that didn't belong to any physical unlocking at all. Because if that door could register open without anyone seeming to open it, then I still don't know what counted as the first time. Story 3. He started running like me. What unsettles me now isn't that a friend followed my routine too closely. People do that. People borrow habits from each other all the time. What unsettles me is how long I kept believing that was all it was, even when the details stopped behaving like normal details. Even when he was waiting at turns I hadn't reached yet. Even when he started saying things I'd only thought. I spent years telling myself I understood risk because I'd been through hard things before. That morning route taught me there's a difference between surviving danger and recognizing it when it wears a familiar face. My name's Oren Vale. I was 41 when this started, and I lived alone in Northeast Portland in a narrow old house off Northeast 21st Avenue. I've always been a routine person, not rigid, exactly, just steadied by repetition. I run early, before sunrise, because I like the city when it's still deciding whether to wake up. Same route most mornings. Out past the residential blocks, down by the park, then back along the quieter side streets before traffic fills in. Cool damp air, a little leaf mold in the gutters, distant traffic humming like an appliance left on in another room. Predictable. Controlled. That mattered to me for reasons I won't drag out here. I'd had a rough few years before that. Nothing mysterious, nothing worth turning into a speech, just enough upheaval that routine felt like a tool. I trusted things I could repeat. A friend of mine named Calder started joining me once in a while. We'd known each other for years, on and off, friendly, not intimate. He'd text the night before sometimes and ask if I was running in the morning. If our timing matched, he'd meet me on the route. At first it was convenient. He kept a good pace, didn't force conversation, and seemed to understand that my run was partly exercise and partly maintenance. The first wrong note was small enough that I almost admire it now. I was about 20 minutes into my route, coming up on a corner where I usually decide whether to lengthen the loop depending on how my knees feel. I hadn't texted him that morning. Hadn't seen him leave his place, but when I turned onto the next block, there he was half a street ahead, already jogging in my direction like we'd planned it. He lifted a hand and said, "Figured you'd come this way." I remember glancing down the cross street automatically, looking for where he'd cut through. That was easy to explain. Shortcut. He knew my habits. No issue. I even felt a little impressed by it. That was the first trap, the fact that he was close enough to normal that every strange thing came with a readier explanation than alarm. We ran together that day. The streets were slightly quieter than they should have been for that hour, which I noticed only because Portland usually has a certain amount of delivery traffic before sunrise. My breath made a pale cloud every few exhale. The damp cold sat in the back of my throat. Calder matched my pace without looking at me much, which suited me fine. After about 10 minutes, I thought I might push harder on the uphill section. Before I changed anything, he sped up. Not a lot, just enough to match the exact pace I was about to set. I looked at him and he gave this quick shrug, like he was reading body language, which, again, fair. Good runners do that. You pick up on cadence changes, posture, breathing. I had every reason to put it in that category. Then he said, "Got to take the hill a little sharper today." That was nearly the exact wording I'd used in my own head maybe 3 seconds before. I laughed once and said, "Yeah, guess so." He didn't answer, just kept running. That should have bothered me more. Instead, I folded it into my existing framework. I have survived worse than an eerie coincidence. I have dealt with volatile people. Bad nights, hospital corridors, the whole long drag of adult disappointment. That's the kind of thinking I leaned on. Experience can make you calm. It can also make you lazy. It convinces you that if you've recognized danger before, you'll recognize it again in time. Over the next 2 weeks, Calder appeared more often. Not every day, which somehow made it more believable. Some mornings he texted, some mornings he didn't. Sometimes he'd fall in beside me a mile from my house like we'd just happened into each other. He started arriving at points before I did. I would round a corner and see him stretching against a fence or jogging in place under a street lamp, already there. Once, near the park, I slowed because a stitch caught under my ribs. He slowed half a second earlier. Another morning, I decided without telling anyone that I'd skip the river path because the pavement there gets slick with moss. At the first alternate turn, there he was standing at the corner, one foot tapping lightly, looking not surprised at all. I said, "Did you guess again?" He smiled, but it wasn't really a smile. More like he'd heard a private joke. "You like patterns," he said. That answer stayed with me because it wasn't wrong. It just wasn't the answer to what I'd asked. The wrongness of it all came in layers too thin to hold on their own. He'd start certain stretches of conversation in phrases I would have used myself. He'd mention a side street before I remembered its name. He once asked if my left calf was bothering me again before I'd felt the first tug in it that morning. Every instance had a practical explanation if I wanted one badly enough, and I did. He knew me. He'd run with me enough to learn my pace. He paid attention. People call that friendship when it stays within the accepted borders. I started testing him without admitting to myself that I was testing him. I changed my watch to the other wrist. He noticed before we left my block. "You finally switched," he said. I took a different pre-run stretch under the sycamore by the corner store. The next morning he was doing it too. 1 block ahead, in the same sequence, only not quite right. The timing was off. He held the ankle too long, switched sides too fast, like he'd studied the shape of the action without understanding why each part flowed into the next. That was new. That was where imitation entered it. And yet even then I didn't stop. I wish I could tell you I did something sharp and sensible. I didn't. I kept running because routine had become proof to myself that nothing had changed. Also because I had survived other kinds of fear by refusing to let them take practical things from me. If I stopped running my route, that meant this mattered. It meant my experience didn't cover it. I wasn't ready to concede that. One morning before dawn, I came downstairs to lace my shoes and happened to glance through the narrow window by the front door. Calder was already outside, not at the curb, not on the sidewalk stretching. Right by the gate, hands in the pockets of his gray windbreaker, face tipped down like he'd been waiting and didn't want to seem like he was waiting. I stared for a second too long. He looked up, and for one bad moment I had the strange feeling he'd been aware of me at the window before I moved. I opened the door and said, "How long have you been there?" He said, "Just got here." The air outside was cold and wet enough to stick to my teeth. Somewhere farther down the block a garbage truck groaned in reverse. He fell in beside me immediately, matching the rhythm of my stride so perfectly it made my shoulders tense. We didn't talk much that morning. My route took us through a patch of residential streets where porch lights still glowed amber and the sidewalks shone dark with dew. The city felt muted, as if something had wrapped the usual morning noise in cloth. I kept trying to hear his footfalls separately from mine. Most of the time I couldn't. Then, halfway up a long gradual incline, I had a thought that was ugly and immediate. What if I just stop? I didn't say it. I didn't even fully decide it. The idea flashed across my mind the way bad impulses do. And Calder said, "No. Keep going a little farther." I looked at him so sharply I nearly clipped the curb. He was looking straight ahead. "What'd you say?" I asked. He blinked once. Then he smiled that small private smile again and said, "Hill's almost done." My chest tightened in a way running didn't explain. I could feel sweat cooling under my shirt despite the cold. The back of my neck had gone clammy. But experience kept trying to rescue me. Maybe he'd read the hesitation in my gait. Maybe I made some noise under my breath. Maybe I'm retrofitting the moment because of everything after. That was how I kept thinking. Not that something impossible was happening, but that I had slipped 1 degree off from reality and needed to correct. The inversion happened slowly. That's the only word for it. I began the whole thing believing I understood the situation. Friend joins runs. Friend learns habits. Friend gets a little overfamiliar. Annoying, maybe. Boundary issue at worst. Then one by one the normal explanations peeled off and there was nothing solid underneath them. I started leaving 5 minutes earlier than usual. He still met me on the route. I doubled back once without warning, pretending I'd forgotten something. He was at the next corner anyway, waiting like he'd anticipated the loop. I took a hard turn down a side street I almost never used. 30 seconds later he emerged from the opposite end, already in stride, breathing evenly, no sign he'd sprinted to make up ground. He also began talking in ways that made my skin feel too tight. Not threats, nothing that clean. He'd say, "This is where you usually think about cutting it short," or "Your right knee's better when it's colder." Or once, while we stood at a crosswalk waiting for an early delivery truck to rumble through, he said quietly, "You don't really look left there anymore." I said, "What?" He nodded toward the intersection. "You used to." The phrase that stuck with me the longest was one morning near the park when he said, "You always relax once you can see your own street again." Not "I always noticed you relax." Not "I can tell." Just "You always relax." It sounded observational, but also rehearsed. I started sleeping badly. Nothing dramatic. Just that thin, useless sleep where every house sound gets promoted into significance. Pipes, the refrigerator motor, a branch tapping glass. I kept waking before the alarm with my chest already tight. My coffee started tasting metallic because my mouth was dry all the time. I found myself checking the front window before going downstairs, then hating myself for checking. The morning it broke, the sky was still more night than day. Damp, cold, no wind. Traffic low and distant. Calder joined me 2 blocks in, no greeting. We ran side by side past the dark windows of houses still asleep, our breath moving white in front of us. My route should have felt familiar. Instead, every landmark had that subtly wrong feeling of a place you've dreamed about and then visited in real life. I was tired. Not just physically. Tired of thinking around him. Tired of explaining him to myself. So near the midpoint of the route, on a flat stretch with a chain-link fence to one side and a row of parked cars to the other, I stopped dead. No signal. No gradual slowdown. Just stopped. Calder kept running. Not a step or two. Several seconds. Long enough that the space between what he should have known and what he actually knew became undeniable. He kept his pace, kept his form, kept moving as if the version of me in his head was still beside him and hadn't broken pattern. Then he stopped too, slowly, like he was remembering to do it after the fact. My whole body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. I could feel my pulse hammering in the sides of my neck. Sweat under my shirt turned icy. He turned around. For a second he only looked confused. Not guilty. Not caught. Genuinely misaligned, like a reflection that had gone on moving after the person stepped away. I said, "How did you do that?" He tilted his head. "Do what?" My voice came out rougher than I expected. I said, "Stop pretending this is normal." He took one step toward me. I raised a hand without thinking and said, "No. Stay there." That actually made him pause. The street was empty. No dog walkers, no cars close enough to matter, just the faint hiss of distant tires on wet pavement and the smell of damp cedar mulch from some nearby yard. I could hear my own breathing getting ragged. My hands had started trembling in those tiny fast pulses that make your fingers feel detached. I said, "You've been showing up before me. You know where I'm going before I decide. You say things I haven't said. So either tell me what the hell this is or leave me alone." He looked past me then, over my shoulder toward the route home, and in this very calm voice, almost gentle, he said, "I was trying to keep up." "I still don't know what that meant," I said. "With what?" He didn't answer. Then he smiled again, but this time it slipped. That's the best way I can say it. The expression arrived in pieces assembled from observation rather than feeling. "Almost right. Not right." He said, "You change less than you think." I backed up a step. My shoes squeaked faintly on damp asphalt. Every part of me wanted to turn and run, but I couldn't stand the idea of him matching that too. So I did the only thing left that felt like mine. I confronted him again, louder this time. I told him not to come near my house, not to contact me, not to show up on my route. I said his name hard enough that it echoed off the fence. He flinched at that, really flinched. Then he looked down, as if embarrassed, and without another word he turned and jogged away. Not fast, not panicked, just gone. I stood there for a full minute before my legs worked properly again. My chest hurt from how shallow my breathing had become. When I finally moved, I didn't finish the route. I walked home by the busiest streets I could find, checking reflections in dark storefronts and parked car windows the whole way. He never joined me again after that. No texts, no explanations, no surprise appearances. If you'd asked me then, I would have said good. Problem solved. Except it didn't feel solved, it felt removed. Like something had been interrupted, not ended. I stopped running that route entirely. Then I stopped running before dawn. Then for a while I stopped running outside at all. I used a treadmill at a gym across town and hated every minute of it. Even now, years later, I don't like set routes. I vary turns. I double back randomly. I leave at different times. People think that's anxiety management. Maybe it is. But it also feels like refusing to hand over an outline of myself. The question that stayed with me isn't whether Calder was dangerous in a way I can neatly describe. It's something smaller and worse. If I had changed my route earlier, would he have adapted right away, learning the new pattern as fast as I made it? Or had he already worked out enough of me that wherever I chose to go would have looked to him like somewhere I'd always been heading? I still run, but not in loops, not anymore. Every time I come to an intersection before sunrise, I make myself choose late, and I never let my body decide before my mind does. I used to think experience gave you a reliable map for fear. You survive enough things, you start trusting your own ability to sort real danger from nerves, control from overreaction. What that route taught me was uglier. Sometimes experience only teaches you how to keep a bad explanation alive longer than you should. Calder stopped appearing after I confronted him, but that doesn't feel like victory. It feels like I finally disrupted whatever version of me he had been practicing against. The thought that keeps returning is stupidly practical. Not what he wanted. Not even how he knew so much. It's whether he would have known my next route before I did. Because if the answer is yes, then quitting that street wasn't avoidant. It was the last decision I made before the pattern made itself without me. Story 4. The pickup that wasn't planned. When people ask me about the worst part of that night, they expect me to say it was when the people surrounded the car. It wasn't. The worst part was earlier, before I knew enough to be afraid, when the passenger door stayed open and I almost leaned over to pull it shut. If I had gotten out for even a second, I don't think I'd be telling them. My name's Imani Paike. I was 32 then, working mobile veterinary overnight calls around Phoenix, which means being alone professionally had long stopped bothering. Empty roads, silent parking lots, bad fluorescent lighting, people frantic at strange hours. That's normal in that job. You learn to dismiss noise cleanly and pay attention only to what matters. That mindset helped me right up until it didn't. I was already driving when my friend Tamsin called and asked if I could make one quick stop with her. She sounded wound tight, talking fast. Said she needed to pick up a few belongings from an apartment complex she'd rather not visit alone. 5 minutes, maybe 10. It was late, but I was still in scrubs and already on the road, and the complex was supposedly on my way. Necessity makes a lot of decisions feel more reasonable than they are. By the time we pulled into the place, the night had that dry, lingering heat Phoenix keeps even after midnight. The air outside the cracked window smelled like hot dust and sun-baked concrete finally cooling. The streetlights buzzed with that insect-like electrical hum cheap fixtures make. The complex itself looked mostly dark. Long, low buildings, beige stucco, parking lines faded to ghost marks, no lights in most windows. Too quiet even for late. Tamsin unbuckled before I had fully stopped. She said, "Wait here, I'll be right back," and got out so fast her bag strap caught on the seat and snapped loose. She swore under her breath, yanked it free, and hurried toward Building C. She left the passenger door open behind her. I watched it sitting there wide in the dome light spill, and my first thought was that she'd forgotten in a rush. That's all. I almost reached over to pull it in, but I had paperwork on the center console. My coffee between the seats, and I figured she'd be back in a minute, so I let it stay open. That was the first wrong note, and I dismissed it automatically. People forget doors. People forget a lot when they're stressed. I killed the engine but left the headlights on. The beams lit up a stretch of empty lot and a low wall covered in sun-bleached graffiti. My car ticked softly as it cooled. Somewhere farther off I could hear a freeway, a constant distant rush like air through a vent. Otherwise almost nothing. Then I noticed movement between the buildings. A figure crossed the gap at the far end of the lot, not coming toward me, just passing between two dark stairwells, then another. Both moved with purpose but not hurry. I catalogued it the way I would on a late call. Resident, probably cutting through. No issue unless they alter course. I checked my phone. No new messages. Another figure crossed, closer this time, still not looking at the car. The silence out there felt unusually complete. No televisions through open windows. No nearby conversation. Not even a barking dog. Just streetlight buzz and the faint, dry whisper of wind moving litter along the curb. After maybe 2 minutes, somebody approached the car from the passenger side. He didn't look in. Didn't speak. He just put a hand on the open door handle and tried it like he expected it to be shut. I said, "Hey." He let go immediately. Still no eye contact. He turned and walked away at the same pace he'd come, head slightly down, hands loose at his sides, like he'd tested the handle by habit or by instruction, and my voice had only confirmed a detail. That got my attention. I reached across and pulled the passenger door shut. The sound it made seemed too loud in that lot. I locked the doors. Then I texted Tamsin, "You good?" Her reply came almost at once. "Do not leave. Under any circumstances." No explanation, no emoji, nothing to soften it. That was when my stomach dropped properly. I called her, straight to voicemail. I called again, same result. I looked at Building C. No movement at the entrance. No lit window that made obvious sense. The scrub top under my seatbelt was sticking to my back now. I could feel sweat cooling between my shoulder blades even though the car was off. I thought about driving away anyway. Then I thought about her inside some apartment, needing a ride out, and me leaving because I got spooked by a weird parking lot. Professional habits cut both ways. You don't abandon people on bad instincts alone. Then the figures started appearing where the headlights ended. Not rushing, just there. One near the low wall. One by the stairwell. Another at the edge of the opposite building. They didn't approach the car directly. They just settled into positions around it, all of them just beyond the clean, brightest part of the beams. Enough light to catch the fronts of their clothes and the shine in their eyes when they turned their heads. Not enough to read expression. I grabbed my phone again and texted, "What did you bring me to?" No answer. I started the car. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught. Relief hit so hard it actually made my hands weaker. I shifted into reverse, then froze. One of them had moved behind me. I hadn't seen him do it. He wasn't touching the car, just standing in the path I'd need to back through, facing the windshield without any visible urgency to move. I honked. Nothing. Not defiant. Not reactive. Nothing. A second honk. Longer. No movement. I could feel my pulse in my palms on the steering wheel. The dry, recycled smell of the car interior suddenly seemed suffocating. Coffee, vinyl, hand sanitizer, my own sweat. I threw the car into drive instead and pulled forward a few feet. Two others drifted closer on either side, still silent, still not making eye contact. That's the moment my professional calm stopped helping. All my neat categories started failing at once. These were no longer residents moving through their own space. No one was drunk. No one was asking for money. No one was yelling. Silence like that is worse than shouting because you can't negotiate with it. You can't even misread it usefully. My phone buzzed. Still Tamsin, stay parked. I stared at that message with my mouth actually open. Stay parked. In a lot where people had already arranged themselves around my car before she finished whatever she was doing inside. I called her one more time and got voicemail again. Then a text followed. Please. That one almost kept me there. Then more people stepped into view. Not many. 4, maybe 5 total by then. Enough. They stood just outside the headlights, watching the car with that patient stillness that strips all normal meaning out of a human body. One of them was close enough now that I could see the side of his jaw, the fold of a hood, the dust on his shoes. No one signaled. No one spoke to anyone else. They looked less like a group deciding what to do and more like a situation already in progress. My throat had gone tight. I kept swallowing and getting nothing from it. My hands were slick on the wheel. I hit the horn again and held it. That finally changed the picture. Not because they reacted, because another set of headlights turned into the lot. A sedan, moving slow. It rolled past the entrance, its lights sweeping over the buildings, the low wall, the backs of the silent people around me. In that bright moving wash, they looked suddenly ordinary. Too ordinary. Hoodies, jeans, work boots, one person in a white t-shirt. That almost made it worse. Human enough to have chosen this. And then they dispersed. Not panicked. Not running. They just broke formation and walked away between the buildings as if the scene had ended for now. The man behind my car moved first. The others followed, peeling off into shadows and stairwells. I didn't wait for full clearance. I hit reverse hard enough to squeal tires, swung the car around and shot for the exit. My whole body was shaking by then, not visibly enough for anyone outside to see, but enough that my right foot trembled on the gas. At the mouth of the lot, Tamsin came sprinting out from between the buildings carrying a duffel bag and one plastic storage bin. I almost kept going. I hate admitting that, but I almost did. Instead, I braked just long enough for her to wrench the passenger door open and throw herself inside. She was breathing so hard she couldn't speak for the first block. The storage bin had burst half open and spilled papers and a framed photo across the floorboard. She kept twisting around to look out the back window. I said, "What the hell was that?" She said, "Drive." I was already driving. We didn't talk until we were back on a main road under normal streetlights with other cars around us. My chest still felt hollow and overfast, like my body was trying to sprint while the rest of me sat strapped in place. I asked again what she had gone in there to get. She wiped at her mouth with the back of her hand and said, "My stuff." That was it. I asked who those people were. She said, "I don't know." I said, "Don't lie to me." She turned to the window and didn't answer. She never really explained after that either. We talked less and less in the months that followed until eventually we became one of those friendships that exists only as an old contact in a phone. I don't know what she went back for. I don't know who was waiting there or whether they were waiting for her, for anyone connected to her, or just for the chance presented by a parked car and somebody told to stay inside it. What I do know is this. Those people were already in position before I understood I was in a bad place, and Tamsin's message telling me not to leave came after the door handle had been tested, not before. I still drive for work. I still sit alone in lots at bad hours, but if someone leaves a car door open now, I don't explain it away. I lock the whole vehicle immediately and I leave if the silence around me starts feeling arranged. I've replayed that lot in my head more times than I can count. The open passenger door, the first person crossing between buildings, the hand on the handle without eye contact, the text telling me not to leave. Every version ends with the same question. Why insist I stay parked in a place where people seem to be waiting before we even arrive? If she needed a ride, she could have called me when she was ready. If she needed backup, she could have told me the truth. Instead, she placed me there and then asked me to remain exactly where I was once it became obvious something was wrong. I still don't know whether I was cover, bait, insurance, or just a convenient second body in a car somebody had already noticed. All I know is that when another vehicle's headlights swept that lot and the people stepped back, nobody looked surprised, like the interruption had changed the timing, not the plan. Story 5. The game night that changed. You can convince yourself of almost anything when it happens once a week. That's what I've learned. Frequency makes people careless. It also makes them polite. If something feels a little off every Thursday, you start preparing explanations on Wednesday. He's distracted. You're tired. Old houses make sound. Memory gets thin around the edges as you age. That's how I kept the routine alive long after the routine had changed into something I no longer understood. My name's Merritt Sloan. I was 58 when this began, living alone in a small town outside Madison in a house with old wood floors that settled differently depending on the weather. Every Thursday night for years, my neighbor Dale came over for cards. We used to be close, the kind of close that survives divorces, job changes, long bad winters. Time had worn that down some, but the game remained. Same table in the dining room. Same wall clock ticking over the sideboard. Same smell of old furniture polish and stale coffee in the curtains. Familiarity can make you ignore a lot. I was comfortable alone. Still am mostly. I cook for one, read in the quiet, know every complaint this house makes after dark. Thursday game night was just the one standing ritual I never gave up. The first wrong note was so small I hate how much it matters now. I came in from the kitchen carrying the cards and found Dale already seated at the table. I hadn't heard the front door. Hadn't heard his knock either. He was just there, hands folded, looking at the empty spot where I always sit. I remember stopping in the doorway and thinking maybe I'd missed the sound while the kettle ran. That's plausible. Old hearing, old pipes, old house. He looked up and gave me a little nod. Nothing strange in it, so I didn't make anything of it. But over the next few weeks it happened again. He'd be inside before I heard him arrive. At first I built those rational explanations in real time. Maybe I was in the basement switching laundry and didn't notice. Maybe I'd left the back door unlocked and he used that because his hands were full. Maybe I was more distracted than I realized. That kind of thinking takes work. And I did the work every single time. I could feel myself doing it too, like patching a crack with wet fingers. Then he started arriving earlier, not announcing it, just present sooner each week. One Thursday I came into the dining room at 6:45 and found his chair already pulled out from the table, though he wasn't in it yet. I stood there looking at that empty chair, the old wood under the lamp looking honey-colored and calm. The wall clock ticking much louder than normal. I almost laughed at myself. Then Dale stepped in from the hallway and said, "Thought we'd get started early." I asked how long he'd been there. He said, "Not long." That answer settled nowhere in me. The next week he stopped responding to certain questions. We'd be halfway through a hand and I'd ask whether he'd spoken to his daughter lately or if he planned to fix the fence before winter, and he just wouldn't answer. Not ignoring me exactly, more like the question had reached him from too far away. He'd keep playing, keep setting cards down with that same careful, quiet touch. Once I asked if he wanted coffee, and after a long pause he said, "You're always in the kitchen after that question." I said, "What question?" He only looked at the deck. That was the first time I felt the room tilt in a way I couldn't explain. Not dizziness, just a sudden bad uncertainty about what had actually been said aloud. I started noticing other things. Chairs slightly repositioned before anyone sat in them. The front hall rug crooked in the same direction every Thursday even though I straightened it that morning. The side door latch not fully caught. Small signs of entry that could all be mine if I wanted them to be. And I did want them to be. Very badly. Because the alternative wasn't just that someone was getting into my house. It was that a routine I'd treated like proof of normal life had become the vehicle for something else. I considered confronting Dale directly more than once, but every version sounded ridiculous in my head. "Hey, are you entering before I hear you? Hey, why are the chairs already moved? Hey, what did you mean by you're always in the kitchen after that question?" It's amazing how embarrassment can protect a bad situation. Then the spiral tightened. One Thursday he arrived so early I found him standing in the dining room with no coat on, though I hadn't opened the door yet. He said he'd let himself in because the weather was turning. His eyes were on the far wall, not me. Another week he came, sat down, and didn't touch the cards at all. Just watched. Watched me shuffle. Watched me deal. Watched my hands with such steady attention that I fumbled the deck and sent 3 cards sliding to the floor. He didn't help pick them up. I laughed because the silence needed breaking. I said, "Well, one of us has to play." He said, "I know." That night after he left, I checked every door twice, then 3 times. I even walked room to room with the old flashlight I keep in the junk drawer, though there was nothing to look for. The house smelled like wood polish and onion soup from dinner and the faint dusty heat of the floor vent under the sideboard. Completely ordinary. Still, I slept badly. Every tick of the clock sounded like a footstep starting and stopping. By then, Thursday had become arithmetic. Morning, afternoon, dusk, hours until 7. Each week I thought about canceling. Each week I talked myself out of it. We've known each other too long. He's lonely. You're reading too much into small things. If you accuse an old friend of something and you're wrong, you don't come back from that cleanly. That's how I kept choosing the least disruptive explanation even while my body had started objecting. Dry mouth by late afternoon. Tightness under the ribs. Hands colder than the room. One Thursday I decided to test reality in a small way. Before 6:30 I locked the front door, locked the side door, and slid a chair under the back knob, which I know sounds excessive, but I wanted something simple, something measurable. I told myself if Dale knocked like a normal person, I'd open the front door and feel foolish and be grateful for it. At 10 minutes to 7 I was in the kitchen rinsing 2 mugs when I heard nothing. No knock, no footsteps on the porch, no latch. Only the clock in the dining room ticking steadily through the doorway. I dried my hands on a dish towel and walked in. Dale was already seated at the table. The room had gone dark except for spill from the kitchen behind me. He was sitting in shadow, facing the exact spot where I always sit. The cards were stacked neatly in front of him. He hadn't turned on the lamp. I stopped so hard the towel slipped from my hand. For a second neither of us moved. The only sound was the wall clock and the little hum from the refrigerator 1 room over. The house smelled suddenly stronger than usual, old wood and cold coffee and whatever comes off a room that's been closed too long. I could feel my pulse in the base of my throat. My hands had gone light and weak. I said, "How did you get in here?" He answered after a pause that felt deliberate, "You were going to come in anyway." I took one step back toward the kitchen without meaning to. I said, "Dale, how did you get in?" He didn't answer that. He just tilted his head a little and looked at my chair. Then he said, "You always sit there." It wasn't threatening. That's what made it awful. It sounded observational, patient, almost tender in the wrong way. Like the fact of my repeated behavior mattered more than my question. I should have told him to leave. I know that. Instead, I reached behind me for the kitchen light and knocked a spoon off the counter. The clatter made me jump so hard my knees went weak. When the light came on brighter behind me, it caught only half his face. The rest stayed in shadow. He still hadn't moved. I said I wasn't feeling well. Stupid thing to say. Small thing. Human thing. I said game night's off. He nodded once. Then he stood up so quietly I didn't hear the chair scrape at all. He walked past me toward the front hall. I flattened myself against the doorway without deciding to. He never touched me, never looked directly at me as he passed. A second later I heard the front door open. I went after him immediately, because I needed to see the mechanics of it. The front lock was still engaged. The door was closed. Dale was standing outside on the porch, visible through the side window, already putting on his coat. My whole body started shaking then, not big enough to see from across a room, but enough that I had to grip the counter with both hands. My chest felt fluttery and hollow. I kept staring at the lock, then at him outside, then back at the lock, waiting for some plain explanation to rise up and save me from what I had just experienced. None came. I stopped hosting the game after that. I didn't confront him formally. I didn't call anyone. I told people we'd let the tradition go because schedules change. That's not the brave version, but it's the true one. I could not stand the thought of inviting witnesses into a thing I still couldn't describe without sounding unsteady. He kept appearing anyway. Every Thursday near the same time I'd see him outside the house. Sometimes at the sidewalk, sometimes sitting in his parked car across the street, once on my porch, not knocking, just looking toward the dining room window. Always quiet, always patient, never forcing the next step. The thing that sticks now is scope. Not motive, not meaning, scope. How many times can someone enter a space before the person living there notices the pattern instead of the event? How many houses, how many routines, how many weekly traditions softened by age and familiarity? I still don't know whether Dale was getting in long before game night changed or whether I simply began seeing a habit he'd already built around me. On Thursdays, I don't use the dining room anymore. I sit in the kitchen with the radio on and keep the deck of cards in a drawer I never open. Because once you've walked into a dark room and found someone already facing the exact place you always sit, the shape of your own routine stops feeling like yours.